Okay, so today I'm going to give an instructional video on how to make your own silicone molds real easily. I've got a 3D printed part in here that I painted, stuccoed, cleaned up, sanded, and then mounted inside of this container. I'll go through the processes of how to mix and prepare your silicone and pour it and how to get a nice mold out of it. Some of the things you're going to need silicone. Smooth On makes a lot of different silicones, and I'm choosing one that's really great for multi-purpose beginners. You don't need a vacuum chamber. We'll talk about the vacuum chamber in a second. And it's also equal parts, so you could either weigh or visually dose it out. The ones that don't have equal part mixing, you definitely have to have a nice scale. I've chosen this to show anybody how to get started. You're going to need some probably paper cups for measuring, at least one mixing pot that's nice and clean. You're going to need some stirring sticks. You might want to use mold release. Typically silicone doesn't like to stick to anything other than silicone, but it's always a nice idea to hit your product with a little bit of mold release, let it dry a little bit, then buff off with some microfiber cloth or cotton. You're going to need your part in a mold. You're going to have to plan how you want that part to come out. So usually I separate it from the base of the mold. You can see a gap. I'll show you when we take it out, so that I can actually mold the radius that wraps around, and then there will be the pour spout. I like to have some kind of a block to prop it up when I'm pouring the silicone, so I could avoid air bubbles, and I pour into the mold, not onto the part. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's nice to have a vacuum chamber and a vacuum pump. What this does is it helps to evacuate the air bubbles from the silicone mix before casting. Air bubbles will ruin a beautiful mold, and it's a shame to have them. So if you have a vacuum pump, you're also able to do all different silicone compounds, not just the simple ones. And then I also have a lot of paper towel to clean up and some alcohol. And that's it. That's all we need, really. Okay. So this silicone, for your information, has a 30-minute work time and a 6-hour cure time. So we want to be well within that 30 minutes. The cure time does not happen, or the setup time doesn't happen until you mix the two together. So you can take as much time as you want, as long as they're separate. As soon as we start mixing them together, we're going to get them stirred well and then put into the vacuum chamber and pour it out within 30 minutes. So one of the ways to know how much silicone to actually prepare is simply by displacement. We could fill up our mold with water and then measure the water that it took to fill up the mold. And then one thing that I like to do is just mark it so I don't forget. And that's how much silicone we need to mix in order for this to be successful, at least. Okay, so I've already previously measured out the amount of material that we're going to want to put into the mold by water displacement. And then I separated that into two, and I actually marked in my cups where I want to fill it up in. That way I can easily measure it out without scales, and I could decide when I want to mix. So our first step is going to be mixing each one of these individually very well. I've already shaken them up quite a bit, let them stand on their head, but it's a good idea to mix it anyway. So we're going to go ahead and open them up, have a different mixer for each one. When you mix, you don't want to be too vigorous. We're trying not to put any extra air bubbles in that we could help, but we're basically scraping the bottoms and the sides to make sure that anything that's really deposited down that has a different density than the rest is mixed well. Since I have shaken this up pretty well, I don't have to mix very long. So put that one right here. Hopefully not knock it over. I'll do this one. Usually about 2 minutes of mixing per container is good. The purple, or the Pepto-Bismol pink, as Andrew has put it, is much more viscous than the blue. So we'll be laying the blue down into the mixing container first. The total viscosity is very thin, which is nice, and that's what makes it easy to mix. Okay, so after these have been mixed for 2 minutes, we'll want to pull out the Pepto-Bismol stick. And I'm going to start to pour until I get to my fill line. You might not see it because it's oriented towards me, but I'm going to get kind of close. This stuff doesn't have to be super precise unless you're doing very small amounts. Okay, and I just leave my stick in there because that'll help me to scrape it when I'm going to pour it into the mixing vat. There we go. You want to remember to put the right colored lid back on the container because you don't want to create a catalytic reaction that then ruins your whole pot of silicone. But luckily Smooth On is very good with color coding everything, not using generic lids. Seal it up well so in the future you've got it. Okay, and the same thing here. Oh, got a little overdose, overspill. And I'm gonna go just above the line. It's without the stick, it's more or less there. There we go. Okay. Once again, use the clean part of the paper towel and not the contaminated one when mixing the other component. I'm gonna seal this one up. Now, since the pink one was much more viscous, I'm going to lay the blue one first. It'll be easier to stir up later. And remember, the timing doesn't start until they've been mixed together. So we've got a lot of time. If you get interrupted by anything, a phone call or whatever, just let them sit. But don't let that happen after we start mixing them together. There are silicones with a lot longer working life. Those are really comfortable if you're going to be making multiple molds or you're not sure what you're doing. This one's a nice balance. There's also a lot of silicones with a really fast working life. And those you've got to stay on your toes for. I'm going to be not using this stick for the mixing because this one's going to clean off pretty well and I'm going to get everything out of there. I'll use my pink one for the mixing. Okay, I'd say that's pretty good. Okay, so now the 30 minutes starts. So pour that stuff in, scrape out the container. Maybe I should have a timer out here, huh? Okay, so now the mixing. Don't start whipping this around like whipped cream. We don't want to put extra bubbles into it. Just gentle movements. When I'm doing very large vats, a lot of times I'll put the spatula right against the edge and pull the vat against the spatula. And this wipes the sides while folding the material into the other. You want to get the bottom as well. You want to get all of that blue that was attached to the sides and the bottom to mix with the pink. We also want to get the pink off of the spatula. And we're going to keep on mixing until we have a very homogeneous color. I find that this method of turning, and if you wedge the palette slightly while you're turning, it's actually folding the material into itself, like I said, while scraping the sides. It's optimum. I've had to do 5 or 10 gallon quantities before, and this is one of the best ways to get those sides clean while mixing and folding it into each other. A flat stick is much more recommended than a dowel because it's actually moving that material around. We're starting to get pretty close to conformity now. You can see some of the blue coming back to the surface. I guess the mixing's probably, I have to see what Smooth On recommends, but I think 5 minutes is a pretty good amount of time to be sure. Okay, so this is looking very nice. So I am going to just clean this palette slightly, put it back in, and we are going to remove the bubbles in the degassing vacuum. Okay. So I'm going to just put this in here. Let me move this over so you can see. Let's put this right here. Okay, get the lid on. I'm going to turn on the noisy motor. And we're going to let that vacuum develop to where it reaches more or less its peak, and then we'll shut off the motor not to fatigue it. And you'll start to see the bubbles appearing on the surface, showing that it's actually doing its job. That silicone will start bubbling. If you mix too vigorously, it'll bubble like crazy. I'm not sure where this motor will reach. This is a brand new degassing vacuum chamber that I just got a whole kit. It's pretty nice for the value. By BACOENG. I'll put the link in the video for your information. I haven't used it enough to be able to say whether I endorse them or not, but I purchased this with my money and it looked like a good kit. Looks like it's reaching its peak, so I'm going to shut off the vacuum and we'll just watch as the material degasses. Again. Okay, we're within the working time and I want to have enough time to pour into the mold. It's been probably like 5 minutes in the degassing. We don't see many more bubbles coming to the surface. If we had a longer working time, maybe I would have left it in a little further, but I think we're fine. I'm going to pour it in a way that's going to eliminate some of the bubbles. So right now we're going to take the pressure out of the chamber by releasing the suction, and you'll see that thing just smooth out as this reaches our atmosphere. And then it's all gone. I can lift off the lid, put this over here, take out our mixed silicone, and we can begin our pouring process. So, grab a chair. So for the pour, it's important that you don't pour onto your part because you could trap air in that way. It's always nice to pour it into the mold. I keep it angled in a way that any trapped air will slowly work its way upward. I'm going to take out this and only use it if I actually need. Oh, now am I making a mess? I actually need this. Okay, so the best thing to do for pour is patience. Trying to get a very thin, flat bead to come out. You want a ribbon, basically, and that helps with the tension. There we go. If you can get that ribbon to go, it really helps to break any other air bubbles that might be in there. And I'll start pouring and allow the silicone to slowly find its way around the back. The area for trapped air potential right now is really not on my piece. I guess where the logos are, that's going to be an issue. We'll pour real slowly there. But it's around the underside, which is less important to me anyway, but I'll just show you. So what I'm really trying to do is pour in this flat top area and let it push its way upward, taking the air bubbles with it. Okay, as we start getting the logos, I'm going to slow down and let it find its way into the logos. Trying to wait till that back side has worked its way around and met and reaches the top. There we go. I'm pretty confident that we've gotten the air out, and the small details that could have trapped the silicone look like they had carefully filled. We'll only know when this is done, unfortunately. It looks like we also mixed the right amount of silicone. Now this is a part that's going to pop out on its own because it's actually got a very big opening on the bottom where it was glued to the base. But it's also possible to englobe the whole part in silicone and then cut an opening line with a razor blade, preferably jagged, so when it seals back together it finds the right position without it going off, and take your part out and you have a completely closable mold. You do have to think about the pouring sprues and venting sprues, but that's a whole other topic. I want to just do this for a very simple beginner video. I'm sure those of you that do this for a living can give me a lot of good tips. I haven't really done professional silicone since the 1990s when we were doing a lot of prototyping and special effects. And it's certainly nice to have a company like Smooth On now that's aimed at all the really cool DIY and hobbyist stuff. They've got a lot of really cool materials like silicones and polyurethanes and castable materials, clear and colored, and different hardnesses. Anyway, we're pretty much done. I leave this as it is. The thicker the silicone I can leave in the container, the easier it is to clean it later because you can just pull it all out. But this will clean up for me. The stick will. The ones that are contaminated, I'll throw away because that's not going to harden until they're mixed. And we're going to come back in 6 hours and take the mold off and see how successful our pour was. Okay, it's been 6 hours, which is the manufacturer's cure and mold release time, and it feels pretty beautiful. I'm going to be cutting away the mold. If it wasn't a round piece, I would have probably built a square box. I usually do that with polystyrene sheet, which is simple to score and break and cut in a straight line. You can quickly hot glue it together to get a seal and then break away each side. Sometimes you build wooden boxes if you want to have some kind of a retaining rigid wall that later you can use to hold your mold in place as you're pouring. I'm just starting a cut to see how this material moves. There we go. There we go. Sides are away. That's pretty nice. Now this is the bottom of the cardboard box, which is glued to the base of my part. And then the part has an undercut. It's actually going in, and I did that so that I can have the filleted bottom edge. Let's see if we can't get it out. That's right. I'm just peeling it away from the mold gently. I really don't want to rip any details right now. Sticking to the cardboard more than anything. Okay, let's see if I can get this out. There we go. Coming out easily. There's our mold. Got a little bit of extra flashing that went underneath the cardboard that I'll trim with the scissors, but you could see there are no air bubbles even in the logo, which I was very concerned with. That's a beautiful surface finish. Sometime in the future, I'll come back and show you what it looks like casting some cement in here, which was what this was intended to do. By the way, this is how I created the base of this piece. I made a little standoff because I did want that material to come over the top. But if you're ever gonna cast something that just is gonna be an open bottom that you're gonna wipe off, you just can glue it right to the bottom of the... One cup should be more than enough.
Concrete is an interesting material.
Sure is.
And the consistency of it, it's like almost a solid and a liquid at the same time.
Yeah.